This is part 2 of the awesome interview with Peter Lefkowitz. If you have not listened to part 1, jump back over to part 1, listen to that first before you jump into this episode. All right, enjoy, guys.
So I think a lot of people think, I think AI is going to be a huge player, but at the same time, it's a technology is going to fix everything. This technology is going to help my people build more.
I agree. And most people are justified in saying that because most people that are working a desk right now are your age or a little younger. And so technology has driven everything for them, right? I mean, they break up with their partner by texting. It's just we get a chance to hide behind something that muffles the emotionalism that could bounce off of somebody and come back to us by it being in text. Okay? So it's justifiable for people, that are millennials or Gen Zs to feel that way. I hold nothing against them for that. But when they are taught that there's another part of this that actually affects the trust and the loyalty that somebody extends to you as they develop through their career and they ultimately become a manager and say, I want Ben to find me people because I've witnessed how he's found me a job and how real he is with me and how he listens and yada, yada, yada. That's how you build these long-term. So people can be taught that. They really can. But you first have to find out whether or not people have the ability to communicate verbally well. Then you can change the content of what they say. But there's a ton of people that just don't communicate verbally well anymore. They're sporadic. So when I'm it's kind of like if I was like, okay, let me just put it like this way. All right, so a couple of weeks ago, there are people that talk like that. Everything's broken up, right? And they're hard to follow. And so these are things that need to be tested before somebody takes the job of a recruiter. So once we know that their verbal presentation is logical, it's chronological, it's sequential, things they can color their words that cause people to smile or to feel emotions, then we can teach them the content that we can do. But it's not going that way right now unless you get trained in Morgan.
Well, and it kind of you just hit a few points. So, okay, we talked about training, we talked about retraining, and we highlighted earlier about the 3 places to find a great recruiter, or 3 places that where you could find what would be a high performer. And I feel like recruiting agencies have forgotten this because I remember my days at Aerotech, we were told to like target, if we're out to lunch, try to find the great person that could be the great recruiter on your team. So you're saying, what was it? Retail, hospitality, and what was the third one?
And the third was brokerage services. And in the order of insurance brokerage services, but not personal, commercial insurance. And the second was financial brokerage. And the third was real estate brokerage, but commercial real estate. Okay. So these are all businesses where there are 2 sides to the deal that have to be brought together so that they at least understand that. One of the most productive teams that I ever hired, without going through the long story, but without any one of these people knowing except their manager, I pulled 8 people from Merrill Lynch without them knowing that they were all taking this job and starting on the same day, plus their manager, who did know. But I told the manager, you are not to talk to these people. They need to make their decision on their own, not just because they're following you. And they opened up one of our offices like that. And they were good. These are people that are conditioned to make 100 calls a day, although I'm not in favor of huge call volume, because if you tell somebody you need to make 100 calls a day, the quality of those calls, it's like, yeah, the reason I'm giving it, I am. Okay, well, thank you very much. Like, hey, boss, that's one call I made, right? I'm looking for longevity, for the length of time in a call. The only dashboard stat that I track on our VoIP systems, which I encourage our owners to do also, is not the number of calls, but it's the time between the call. That tells me the intensity of a recruiter, okay? Because the average recruiter, when they are making phone calls, will take almost 27 minutes between each phone call. So guess what happens to the adrenaline level in that 27 minutes? It sinks. They have to bring it back up. So, if you are going to be making phone calls, and not everybody does, but we encourage 7 intense blasts back to back. Okay? You hang up with your finger and you dial another call, and on a piece of legal pad, you write down the results of that call manually so that you don't get into the system every time you want to record something. You get into the system at 3:30 in the afternoon and record all of it then. Because when you record individually, on your way out from recording that data in your ATS, you always stop by your email and check that out. And then you find out a candidate says, I've moved, I joined this company, here's the URL. You get into the URL. Oh my God, that's very cool. Then you forward that to 8 other people. Check this out. And then everybody gets taken out of business. The adrenaline goes down. Then you have to pump yourself up to make your next phone call. Just do it all at once.
So the 27 minutes, I feel like half the time is a recruiter that's kind of like, 1, getting distracted by something, but 2, also figuring out who they're going to call next.
Why would they do that on the day that they're calling?
That's why I'm walking into this question. You think, you believe, and I know you train, but recruiters should know who exactly they're going to be calling that day, right?
Yeah. And if they're under my employ, as militaristic as this sounds, but I do want to tell you that when I hire somebody, I tell them that my job is to make you do the shit that you don't want to do so that you end up making the kind of money you told me you wanted to make when we interview. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Part of that shit you don't want to do is, until you've been in the business for 6 months, nobody leaves the office until I am aware of your full day's plan for tomorrow. Yeah, well, you're like infringing on like my personal like space, and go find another job, man. Okay? There's a way to do this business right. And if it may curtail some of your personal freedom, I'm sorry, man. Firemen don't get a chance to use the stairs. There's a pole. And when they get hired, they're told, when we are in a hurry, we go down the pole. I'm telling you, you got to be planned before you start your day. It's as simple as that.
And when you say planned, what does that mean? Because I know a lot of people, when they hear the word planned, they think, hey, here's the 3 most important things that I need to check off today.
In Morgan methodology, your day is time blocked. Okay? So you may start off with a meeting in the morning, but then we're going to call 3 candidates that we haven't communicated with for a while, and we're going to find out where they've been interviewing on their own, and we're going to pick up job order leads that we have the ability to call on. Okay? Then we're going to call on those leads. And then from 10 o'clock to 11:30, we are going to do back-to-back biz dev calls to companies that we have never done business with ever. And we're going to do that until 11:30. And at 11:30, we're going to conduct our first interview, full-fledged 1-hour interview with a candidate that we have recruited the previous day or last week, but set up our full-fledged, who are you? What do you want in your life? Give me examples of your expertise, just the full interview. At 12:30 to 1:30, we'll do another candidate if we can. Now, every day you're not going to have 2 candidates to do. Some days you won't have any candidates. But candidates who are good don't want to be interviewed at 10 o'clock in the morning. They're working. The desperados, they don't mind, okay? But high-performance people will actually say to you, look, man, I'm still employed. I still owe this company my loyalty. I'm not going to I've got a dentist appointment and meet you at 10 o'clock. Why don't we skip lunch, work during that period of time, or we could do it early in the morning, or we could do it anytime after 4. So that's when we do our interview. And at 1 o'clock or 1:30 to 2 o'clock, we do telesourcing. So we get on the telephone with a receptionist of a company and we say, tell me something, who's the individual that functions as the chief financial officer? We write down the name. And in her absence, who's second in command? That would be the controller. I got another name. And if there's still a friendly receptionist with us. So what I understand is that the controller has 2 different department managers, one in accounts payable, one in accounts receivable. That's kind of sort of where my call needs to begin. Who are those people? And in a half hour, people who are trained to do this properly average 7, 8, 9 names in that half hour. And then what we have people do, because we do this during training, right? They do these live calls during our training program. Then I have them compare the names that they got with LinkedIn profiles. And about 30% of them are no longer with the company that their LinkedIn profiles show. So this is how we find people that are there, right? And then from 2 o'clock to 3:30, back-to-back recruiting calls to those people. It's a structured day, and you kind of become a machine that makes a lot of money. And then you reach a point where you can either say to your boss or to yourself as a solo practitioner, I don't need the machine anymore. My skills are home, and now I'm going to work when I want to. But I know the methodology. I know I need to make calls in groups and so forth. So when people are starting off and training, again, they only know what you teach them, and we start them with a plan of action that ultimately becomes habitual. But as they get good, we forget about what we taught them and say, just do your thing, man. You're the boss now. You're in control. You've learned.
So I feel like we can talk all day, but there's 2 more directions I want to go before we jump over to the quick fire questions. Because this is all good. I just checking time for the listeners. First of all, you talk about how old school billers can run circles around new school recruiters. Explain that and why.
In 20, 25 years ago, when the average fee was $14,000, right? And maybe the average salary was 65 to 80 in that category, okay? Oftentimes lower than that as well. And our commission structure was less than it is today. The average recruiter, in order to make their monthly nut at home, had to crick. And back in those days, without the tech stack that we have today, the average recruiter in America was doing 2 to 4 deals a month. And that means that they were doing like 3 to 7 or 8 split deals a month if they had other partners that they were working with. I mean, our ability to do transactions was much higher than what they are today. Then human nature took over, because when now our average fee is $27,000 to $34,000 on a direct hire, and our commissions are no longer 20% commissions, and now they are 35 to 55%. There are some crazy owners that have a aggregate rising scale up to levels that are just stupid. When I place one guy and the fee that I'm bringing to the company is $40,000 and my commission is 40%, I'm getting a check for $16,000. And that's more money than I've ever made a month in my other job. I'm going to chill a little bit. People have the ability to work to their level of need, and then they shut down. So if you work with a company that has certain activity standards, if you're going to suck in this business, you'll only generate 10 fresh new candidates a month. If you're going to be average or acceptable, I'm just making up numbers now, okay? It's different for everybody. you generate between 11 and 17 candidates a month that you fully interview. That's what we consider to be a recognized candidate. And if you hit 18 or above, you're excellent, and you get a little bit of a reward. And you start to develop this rhythm that recruiters have. And they get locked into a rhythm where they feel bad if they're not doing X amount of stuff. As the fees get higher and they stay in that rhythm, their production goes through the roof. But if there's no expectations for activity levels, and I get lucky and I do a $50,000 fee and my commissions are 40% or whatever, I'd call my mom and go, Mom, I made more money doing one deal this month than other people who have done 2 or 3 deals. I could kind of chill, right? And, my boss is fine with that because I'm bringing in the money. When you have companies that are outcome-based, they are billing-based versus companies that are activity-level-based. The activity-level-based companies crush the companies that are built on dollar or billing philosophy. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I mean, building out systems, working through the systems, but like what you're saying, whether working at an agency, your agency owner, or your solo desk, at the end of the day, you need to be so focused on the systems that you're not, like, the outcomes are going to be there, but you're not living on the level of need that you have. Like, as a recruiter, you should be focusing.
Meaning if you're following...
Yeah, if you're following the system, yeah.
And you're still not making the money?
I mean,
if you're saying...
I'm just saying that, like, as a recruiter, you should be focusing on the systems and focusing on the habits and focusing on the activity rather than just so focused on the outcome and the placements.
Right.
So that goes into my next question. Like, what actually, because you've trained so many recruiters, you've talked to so many agency owners, what actually is a high-performance recruiter?
You want to know in terms of outcome or activity?
Let's talk both.
Okay.
Because people recognize billings, but I know, as podcast guest, recruiter myself, there's only one way to get those billings, and that's by
a direct correlation between levels of activity and levels of billings, right? Correlation. That point needs to be taught to people so that they focus on activity, trusting the fact that their billings are going to be where they want them to be if I do the activity. So from an outcome standpoint, in today's marketplace, on a direct hire basis, I consider high performance people to begin at about $600,000 a year in billings in direct hire. Okay. We've got 28 people that are part of our $1 million biller club, so to speak. Okay. From an activity on the contract side, you do contract as well, right?
We don't do contract now.
No? Okay. On the contract side, you can't judge it by billings because you don't know what the margin spreads are for each company. So the way that we track high performance with our contract clients is number of starts per month. And if a recruiter is capable of 3.5 starts or above per month, they're considered, at least by me, to be in a high performance mode. But the other the other standard that is set is having 20 to 25 people, contractors, out at any given period of time. And when somebody reaches that level in the contract world, they have earned what we call a field services rep, who is going to be the person that is the human octopus for all of the candidates that are out, that recruiter has gotten out. These are the people that handle all of the, where's my check? And my hours were wrong. And somebody's been chasing me around my desk and I feel like I've been harassed. And when you have a recruiter that has that many people out and you have that much interaction back and forth of just natural human stuff that happens while people are working, the recruiter can't recruit effectively anymore, right? So they have earned a field service rep. which can be a part-time college kid.
I love this idea because if you want a good laugh at Aerotech, I was an oddball. I hated the paperwork so much. And I have another question on like high performance on contractors in a second, but I hate paperwork. I'm not a paperwork person. So I convinced another recruiter to get a portion of my spread to handle all my stuff so I could just go back to recruiting. And I got told like by the manager, like, we don't do this. This is dumb. And I'm like, I'm making money. You have a choice. Can I make more money?
But it also can lead to excess. So you also have the majority of owners now that are offshoring their research, right? And so they're not even 180 recruiters because they don't actually talk to the candidates. They don't interview the candidates. They just scrape LinkedIn and they pass appropriate candidates off to the recruiter, who then either makes the phone call or the email or whatever and works the candidate. So we have now found that companies that utilize outside sourcing and researchers have lower production than people that run a full 180 desk, where they're responsible for capturing their own candidate, interviewing their own candidate, prepping the candidate for the job, debriefing them after, and then closing the candidate when they get the offer from whatever partner they have in the deal, unless they're a 360 desk. So the reality is that offshore, and it's not only offshore, it's researchers that are assigned to recruiters produce lazier recruiters. They start to wait to be fed instead of pushing forward. So it's pretty interesting. I'm not going to give you literal numbers of recommendations for activity, but I will give you the concept, because every company has different standards. If you're recruiting physicians, the number of applicants a month is going to be different than if you're recruiting IT testers or whatever. But the important thing is that the team, not the manager, the team figures out at how many candidates, fresh candidates that are recruited and brought into the system on a monthly basis constitutes you suck at your job, and how many constitute, my guys call it chilling, but when I teach it, it's called acceptable. So one is unacceptable, the other is acceptable, and the third is excellence. My guys call it you suck, you're chilling, and you're a badass, okay? And there is a financial reward for being a badass at the end of every month. And provided that the manager of these people are quality controlling the activity that comes in, because the downside of paying for activity is bad activity, right? And just bringing in people for the sake of bringing in. So that needs to be monitored, okay? But once people understand what the standards of quality need to be, they're off on their own. And then there becomes a distinctive correlation between high producing activity, which gives you a bonus, and high producing closure at the end of the month, which gives you a lot of reward, bigger reward. So companies that don't do that do less well than companies that have set those standards.
I love that.
And when you don't have those standards, people once again work to their level of need, and then they relax.
Peter, this has been phenomenal.
You're a good interviewer, man. I love this.
This is fun, and I feel like we could definitely talk all day. But before we jump to the quick-fire questions, is there anything else that you'd love to share about all the stuff that we've talked about?
Well, I don't want to sound like I'm doing commercials or anything, but I just finished developing a software program, which I showed you yesterday. And it's in preparation of my retirement in a couple of years. Everything that I have ever taught is now in a rookie recruiter training app that lays out every phone call that needs to take place in the doing of a deal in scripting that causes a rookie to sound seasoned way beyond normal ramp-up time. And when that rookie gets hit with an objection, they smash a panic button and objection rebuttals come up. You saw that yesterday, and they're smooth. So this is this is the romantic side of the placement industry, not the classic side. The classic side is the tech and getting into underlying reasons and the sequential factors and so forth. This is how to deliver a humanistic way of impressing people on the phone so that they trust you and they remain candidates for a long time. So that's getting ready to launch. And certainly if anybody digs around and finds out how you can reach us, we'd be glad to do a demo for you. It's going to be awesome.
I'll have Peter's information in the show notes. You can check it out. I was actually pretty impressed. Like, if you give that to a rookie recruiter, what I saw yesterday, I was like, man, that was like smoother than I sounded like after 2.5, 3 years of recruiting.
That's what we want. That's what we want. Okay, rapid fire.
What advice would you give if you were chatting with a brand new recruiter in an industry? What would you tell them on how to succeed?
The biggest thing first is that they have to develop a rhythm of how they work, okay? They can't just work because something is pulling on their shirt, so they got to do that right now. They need to have the ability to break their day down into the pieces of activity that ultimately develop the outcomes. So they need to have a time to market. They need to have a time to recruit. They need to have a time to interview. They need to have a time to plan for the following day. And then as their skills develop, they will have a tempo that they work in that becomes unbreakable because it was set at a young age. This, could I make a really stupid analogy for a second?
Yeah, go.
Do you know what draft horses are?
I actually don't.
You know what a Clydesdale is? Like the
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So we used to use them to do our farming here. Okay. When I would train a team of those horses, when they were about 2 years old, they would weigh close to 1,800 pounds, huge, like twice the size of a normal horse. Okay. Hoofs on them that are like that big. And I would put their halters on them, and then I would attach a chain to the halter, and that chain would be attached to the roll bar of a tractor. And behind the roll bar would be a carpet, because they're going to smash into that carpet and they won't get hurt when they do that. So to make a long story short, I set the RPMs at 1,500, which is the pace that I want them to work at whenever they are hooked up and harnessed and put to work. And then I let off the clutch, nice and easy, and we move forward. The first reaction that they have is they sit down on their butt like a puppy on a leash for the first time, right? And they just go, no, 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 and their feet tear up the ground, and they're just like this, okay? And I drag them for what seems like an eternity, but it's probably no more than 2 seconds. And then they go, this isn't working, and they lunge forward, and they hit the carpet. They don't get hurt. When they hit the carpet, they sit down again. When they sit down, they only sit down about half the time they sat down before, because they realize that's not going to work either. Then they lunge forward, but they remember the carpet, and they half lunge. And when they half lunge, that chain gets loose, and there's no pressure on them. And from that point on, they just walk at 1,500 RPM for the rest of their life like that when they're working. And if horses could talk, they'd look at each other and go, if we just stay at this pace, this asshole Lefkowitz isn't going to bother us. Okay, this is just how we work. A recruiter has to set the rhythm of their physicality while they're working first. And during that rhythm, their quality will get better. And as their quality gets better, they are capable of working at a slower pace, but still making the same amount of money, right? Because of the quality. But if they work in a system where the owner has gotten everybody together and says, we all agree that at this walking pace, you suck. And at this walking pace, you're acceptable, chilling. Nobody's going to give you a trophy at the end of the month, but nobody's got their foot in your butt either. You're cool. And at this pace, you excel. As the quality of their work gets better and they hold that rhythm, their production goes through the roof. So the first thing that we want for a young recruiter is to develop their tempo. I probably took too long to explain it,
Yeah, that was perfect. But it goes into the same question, but for somebody that's been around the block 5, 10, 20, 25 years, what advice would you give to them for success?
If you keep on doing what you've been doing, as the expression goes, you'll keep on getting what you've been getting. So they have to make a choice. Do I like what I'm getting? And if not, do I seek other answers for different ways to do things? You know, we grow bubbles around ourselves, and sometimes we don't allow ourselves to get out of that bubble and to explore other ways of doing things. So my suggestion to those people is to pick out a trainer, multiple trainers, and just get exposure to how different people are doing things and pick up some stuff.
That's great. Is there a book that's had a huge impact on your own personal career?
Career-wise, yes, but life-wise, even more so. So 2 books. The one that combined life and career is a book called it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's written by a guy named Robert Pirsig. And it's got very little to do with Zen or motorcycle maintenance. They're used as metaphors. And that whole book's metaphor, even though that book was written 30, 40 years ago, is all about what we're experiencing right now with AI and the shift of people who look at things classically, the technology people, versus the romantics that look at things on a surface level and a more humanistic level, and how to combine both of those worlds so that they accept each other. And that's where we are right now in our industry. So that book was a great book. And I reread that book probably every 5 or 10 years, something like that. The other book, and I don't remember the name of the author, is called The One Thing. Came out about 3-4 years ago. And it's a book that reinforces the fact that you need to pick out one thing at a time and crush it. And don't get distracted by other things. The other things that are priorities that may not be as priority as the one thing will slip in and you will get to them. But you got to put your focus on one major thing at a time and be brutally focused on it until it's completed. So that's affected me business-wise.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And so you crush it with some restaurants. You crush it with some awesome disco clothing stores. You sucked at recruiting, but then you figured out how to crush it. And then you're crushing it as coaching, as a coach. What do you think has been?
But I still have agency.
And real quick, and he still has agencies. So he still is running agencies where he's still plugged in to recruiting on a daily basis. But that goes into the question, out of all these things, what has been a major part of your success? Why are you successful?
Because I find out what the consumer dislikes about getting served by whatever supplier they have. Okay. It's the watch the crowd and move in the opposite direction. Okay. So that whole thing has motivated me. When 95% of all recruiters pitch jobs, we don't pitch jobs. We're contrarian. When 95% of recruiters throw candidates at clients before going deep into what the objectives of the position might be, we first focus not on the job order, but how will you know that this guy or lady has changed what you need changed in your organization? What needs to be sped up or become more accurate or flow better or dissolve personnel problems inside a department? Nobody goes there. And so an employer just thinks that we are there just to, I need 5 years of this and 2 years of this and yada, yada, yada. So it's my success has come from seeing the disappointments of the receivers of our service and then changing the way that we deliver things. So again, not to do a commercial, but I have a 3-hour shorty that we call, instead of a 3-day program, it's what we call a chalk talk called Kicking Down New Client Doors. And the whole program is based on 38 interviews that I did with hiring managers on their likes and dislikes about the services that they receive and their likes and dislikes about the candidates that they end up employing. And so once we know that stuff, when we send an email, we can infuse that our practice deals with candidates who are yada, 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 instead of candidates that are the way they dislike it. So, yeah, it's just being contrarian.
I'm going to ask this next question in two days.
I was just going to say, when I was a single dad, if I would take my boys out to a movie or something, we would watch the crowd, how everybody left the theater, which is to go down and then go out backwards. And so I would ask them, what's the opposite of what they're doing? And kids would say, just going straight down to the exit doors over there, which are the fire doors. But we ended up always parking right by the fire doors. And while everybody was going out backwards, we went out the front. No traffic. And it's just a philosophy.
Love that. So I'm going to ask this question two ways. First of all, the first one's going to be like you sitting in the recruiter desk. Second one's going to be you as the owner of a company. If you had the chance with everything that you know now to sit down with yourself and the first month of you recruiting, what advice would you tell yourself?
When I get pissed at something that's happened between a client and myself, I'm on a recruiting desk now, right? That's okay.
Yep.
Or between a candidate and myself. I've been ghosted, or the candidate lied, or the client will not respond back to us with feedback after they see a candidate or whatever. The advice I would give myself is to wait one full day before hitting the send button. There have been so many things that I've messed up in my life by responding right away instead of sitting back and taking a deep breath, possibly putting myself in the other guy's shoes. Could have been something that came up or whatever, but my wife has taught me that lesson, and so I would do that differently as a recruiter. As an owner, what I would do differently, a lot of your listeners are not going to like this, but I would put a concentration on hiring kids that have grown up with parents that were tough love parents. And so part of my interview now with recruiters is asking them to describe their childhood a little bit. Which one of your parents had the greatest influence on you? How so? And the kids that have had to really, really earn the luxuries in life because their parents had a good sense of value in terms of not just giving or bribing kids or whatever, these kids have ended up with much better work ethic. And I've had so much luck. Not that I'm stereotyping, although I kind of am, but I'm not saying don't hire people outside of these areas. But kids that grew up on farms, like my boys, nobody had breakfast until the horses ate. And when I was a single dad, if their alarm clocks went off in the morning when they were in grade school and they didn't get up, I wouldn't wake them up. They just missed that day of school until they got in enough trouble where they said, you need to get your ass out of bed when the alarm goes off. Those lessons stuck with those kids. And so I look for that in the people that I hired. And I also have hired multiple military people who are much more disciplined. They take criticism better. I don't have to censor things in order to make sure that they're not offended and their mission complete oriented. Nicole, who is my right hand and left hand person, she's director of all things technical, 2 tours in Iraq, a Marine, logistics, ammunition. And when I give her a project, I might get an email at 3:00 in the morning saying it's done. I just think it's so important to look for deep personal characteristics and traits in people rather than just their education. So that's been successful for me as an owner.
Awesome. Well, Peter, for people that want to follow you, what's the best way for them to follow you?
Morgan CG, MORGAN CG for consultinggroup.com. And I think by the time that you may air this, our new website will be completed. And we tried something pretty different on this new website. Most websites are designed to steer people to buying stuff and to services. You will be steered to buying stuff on ours as well, but you may also use our new website as a training tool for you. So there are things where you don't have to buy anything, but you will learn a ton of stuff. It's going to be very cool. It's, again, watch the crowd move in the opposite direction. We put together something that's very, very different from typical websites. So yeah, they can go there or they can email me or whatever. If they want, they'll find me.
Before I let you go, is there anything else that you'd love to share with the listeners?
I just want to tell them to keep watching you because you are really good at what you do. You have an auditory recall that is really strong. So when I throw out just a little tidbit, it's locked into your head and you come back to it later on and you're good at what you do. I would recommend that people follow you and learn all about the guests that you had. And I just want to thank you for a shot at being with you today.
Well, definitely thank you for coming on. And like I started off, like there's a reason why 14,000 people have traveled to the ranch for training. There's a reason it is
the tequila that we serve at the end of the night.
Is it good tequila?
Yeah, but we've developed something through one of our students called a Rebecca. Her name was Rebecca. So it's a shot of tequila with a pickle juice chaser after that. So you can buy rot gut tequila and people don't know the difference.
That's awesome. So outside the tequila, I love this interview so much because as a recruiter, and I know many people out there listening, it was a lot of like when you started recruiting, it was go, 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 go. The secret to success is going deeper and also making sure you're prepared. So Peter, just thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For the listeners, I want this year to be your best year yet. So keep crushing it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast with Benjamin Mena. If you enjoyed, hit subscribe and leave a rating.